Sometimes a single moment reveals everything wrong with a country. In Jakarta, 21-year-old delivery driver Afan Kurniawan was just trying to finish his shift. He dropped his phone near a protest, knelt to pick it up, and in that instant, an armored police vehicle struck him, then ran him over again. Afan died from his injuries. His final delivery became a national tragedy. The entire incident was caught on video and spread rapidly online. Indonesians saw not just a news story, but the brutal reality. A young man crushed by the very forces meant to protect him. The footage ignited outrage, transforming Afan from an anonymous gig worker into a symbol of injustice. Thousands of fellow drivers escorted his casket, a silent but powerful act of solidarity. For many, Afan's death was the last straw, a reflection of their own daily struggles and fears. His story resonated because he was every man, not an activist, just someone trying to survive. The nation's grief quickly turned to fury, and the streets began to rumble. The anger didn't start with Afan's death. It started with lawmakers rewarding themselves. Indonesia's parliament granted themselves a housing allowance nearly 10 times the minimum wage, while ordinary people struggled to get by. Protests began, focused on this blatant display of elite privilege. Then Afan's death hit social media, and outrage exploded. The protests spread to major cities, morphing from a single grievance into a nationwide movement against inequality and government indifference. Demonstrators set government buildings ablaze and targeted officials' homes, looting luxury goods as symbols of the elite's excess. The violence wasn't just about theft, it was a rejection of a system that seemed rigged for the powerful. As one analyst put it, the public was furious with the hedonistic, insensitive behavior of the elites. The movement was no longer about perks, it was about justice, dignity, and survival. The government's disconnect from the people was now impossible to ignore. The fire had been lit, and it was spreading fast. Indonesia was in crisis. President Prabowo Subianto, less than a year in office, faced a nation in turmoil. He'd promised populist reforms, but the protests shattered his image of control. Forced to act, Prabowo revoked the lawmakers' perks in a televised address, hoping to calm the streets. But for many, it was too little, too late. The anger had grown beyond a single policy. He then ordered a harsh police and military crackdown, trying to restore order. This classic mix of concession and force aimed to split the movement, but trust was already broken. Prabowo's government had grown bloated, silencing opposition and expanding military influence. For many Indonesians, protest was the only way left to be heard. The president's call for calm rang hollow to those who felt ignored and betrayed. The crisis exposed the limits of populist gestures in the face of deep inequality. The streets became the last check on power. The government's next move would decide the nation's fate. The protests revealed a nation split in two, a wealthy elite and millions struggling to survive. Indonesia's 50 richest people own as much as the poorest 50 million. The middle class is shrinking, with tens of thousands losing jobs and many forced into precarious gig work. Half of ride-hailing drivers spend nearly all their wages just to get by. No savings, no security. Lawmakers' bonuses felt like a slap in the face, confirming fears that the system is rigged. The protests were a desperate cry from those left behind by progress. The unrest rattled investors, sending the stock market tumbling and the rupiah plunging. Economic health and social stability are inseparable. Anger in the streets quickly became panic in the markets. The numbers told the same story as the protests: a nation on the edge. The gap between rich and poor had become a canyon. The crisis was no longer just political, it was existential. At the heart of it all is Afan Kurniawan, a symbol of both hope and fury. His death gave the movement a human face, turning abstract anger into a personal demand for justice. When people chant his name, they mourn not just a man, but the loss of fairness and dignity. Revoking perks wasn't enough. Indonesians want real change. Jobs, accountability, and a government that truly serves. They want a future where no one's life is disposable. The government's response will determine if this tragedy sparks reform or deeper repression. Afan's story has awakened a force that won't be silenced. His ghost haunts the halls of power, demanding a reckoning. This is a story of tragedy, but also of hope. That one ordinary life can spark change for millions. Indonesia stands at a crossroads, and the world is watching.